Hello, and welcome to our live stream of LudoNarraCon. I'm Alex from Polygon Treehouse, and we're making a modern adventure game called Röki. And this live stream, I'm basically going to be talking a little bit about the characters and animation and the emotion of the characters and the stuff that we do on that side of the game. So, first of all, as a bit of an introduction about me and my background, I'm one of the two founding members of Polygon Treehouse. Prior to that, worked at Sony, PlayStation, Guerrilla Games for quite a long time. When I started in the industry, it was quite a while ago now, 2002, I started, it was PS2, and I started as a character artist and an animator. And throughout my career at Sony, I still maintained those skills. And you know, when I left Sony, I was an art director. Um, but when now we've gone indie, I've very much gone back to creating characters, rigging characters, animating characters, and character performance and carrying emotion. So we wanted to talk a little bit about Röki's character design today. We talked in last night's stream on the main theatre about our approach to holistic storytelling. So that's looping around on the main theatre, and I imagine will be on YouTube, which you should check out as well. But that's what today's live stream is going to be about. If you have any questions throughout the stream, whack them in the chat, and we'll do some Q&A at the end. Before we start, to give a bit of background, I'm just going to play the trailer, the announcement teaser trailer for Röki, so you can get an idea of what it's all about. Okay.
Peggy 12.
Okay. That was the trailer for the game, and as you can see, one of the kind of key things about the art style for the game is that it's flat shaded. And when it comes to character design and that kind of thing, it's quite an interesting style to it. So one of the key principles of designing characters is making sure your color schemes and your shapes and your silhouettes help to define the characters and make them readable. And that is even more so true when working with this art style, because you can see that on the characters on Tuve here, who's our hero. There's no like 3D shading, so you have to make sure that your shapes and your silhouettes and the motions of the characters really help to define the character so they're readable. Because otherwise, if you don't have good shape and silhouette, the characters with this art style can actually be quite hard to just visually understand. So that's one of the first things that's a real consideration. So you can see here with Tuve, she has some cuffs which help define where her arms end and her wrist start. Same with her boots. So yeah, you have to be really careful to make sure that everything's really readable and pops. Because you can't rely on 3D shading to make things read. And one of the things that I was going to talk a bit about today is secondary motion and how that can help your characters. Obviously, the characters in our game are heavily stylized, but we still want them to be sophisticated. Just because something is stylized doesn't mean it can't have sophistication. So one of the things that we like to use quite a lot is secondary motion elements on characters, and by that I mean things like if you look at Tuve, the example on the right, by the way, this example is basically the various stages of the animation. So you can see the blocking here, which is the block keyframe animation. Then when it has the in-between keyframes, but it's still stepped, and then when it gets smoothed out in the spline stage of animation. So they're the 3 stages of when I hand animated the character. And the last one is when we get into Unity, where it has some secondary physics elements applied. And the thing I really like about secondary motion elements is it gives a lot of animation is about selling weight, and that's all about making your character feel believable, like they're actually moving around, the transfer of weight as they're moving. And secondary animation elements are really interesting because they help sell weight and weight transfer. So you can see in the example on the right, Tuve's pom-pom on a bobble hat is moving it emphasizes her movement and the transfer of weight. The same with her hair strands at the side and her drawstrings on a hoodie and her backpack as well. There's lots of elements on the character as well as the core body motion being good. The secondary elements really help reinforce that weight transfer and make the characters feel really weighty and believable, even though obviously they're heavily stylized. And the other thing that I really like about using these secondary motion elements, especially, I guess there's 2 ways you can do them. You can hand animate them, which is cool, which we do, but you can also have them as being physics driven. So on Tuve we have a lot of physics driven stuff, and that's kind of neat because when you're transferring from animation to animation in the game, you're blending from one to the other one. You'll always have the blend, and what the physics simulation stuff does is it sits on top of your animation clips, and so it really softens the transition when you're going from one anime to the other one, and it really helps bridge that gap or smooth it over visually. They're really nice. It's a really nice bridge when you're transferring from animation to animation. So that's something we like to use quite a bit. And because the art style we have is not that hungry in terms of processing and rendering and whatnot, so we're able to throw quite a lot into these elements, add quite a lot of sophistication, which is neat. Yeah, and but as well as this, the secondary motion and the sophistication that it brings. Let's just have a look at another example. So here you can see this is Hendrix. Actually, this is a great example of he's a much more weighty character, and so here you can see we're using his gut to really sell the weight when he's planting his feet, and also on his face. I think you might be able to make out that his beard and his tash are reacting when he's placing his weight, and it just brings things to life. But here you can see as well, when we talked earlier about the visual read of the characters and their shape and silhouette. The other thing that's really important to do is not just be designing your characters in isolation for that one character. We have to make sure that as a cast of characters, they all read when they're next to each other, so you can easily tell at a glance which character is which. Again, that is all the more important in this style. But one of the interesting things that we do, because I'm sure lots of indies do this, because we're not a huge studio, so we have a small team of about there's 2 of us full time, but then we have a wider team of 7 or 8. It's varied at different points of the project, but the character modeling, rigging, and animation design is all done by me. We've had some help with from my friend Binster for animation support, which has been great. But because we're not a huge studio with separate departments for concept art, character concept art, modeling the characters, then rigging the characters, then animating the characters, they can be 4 separate departments. Whereas I handle it all, so it means that we're allowed some quite linked up thinking in terms of because I know I'm going to be animating it, and I know what these secondary motion elements, I'm able to consider that when I'm designing the character and scribbling on a bit of paper. So you can only really exploit those secondary animation elements if they're designed into the character in the first place. So when we're making the characters, you can see, we're gone. Okay, we want to have some drawstrings on a hoodie that can wag around. She's gonna have a backpack where she's holding other items, and that can sway and react to her motion. The same with the we've added all those different elements in the design, so we know we can exploit them later on and add sophistication to the animation. Same with Hendrix here. You can see he's got his belly and his tash and his beard and all that stuff is great, but you need to consider it in the design stage, character design stage. That's kind of like linked up thinking, I guess. Which one of the things I really like about about working in indie stuff. It's really neat. So that's the secondary motion stuff. I'm guessing there's in terms of the which secondary motion elements do we choose to do in physics simulation versus hand animation. It kind of varies really. If stuff doesn't need a massive range of movement, like the belly is hand animated, and his beard is, but all the ones on Tuve are pretty much physics driven. We kind of mix and match depending on what works. Some stuff we kind of struggle to get working with physics, so we go, okay, we're just going to cut our losses and get a more consistent result with hand animation stuff. So onto the that's kind of an overview of high level how we're choosing to design some of our characters. But so we've talked about considering these secondary motion elements when designing characters. But the other thing that we do is we consider how they'll get around. So here you can see one of our characters, a troll sister, who's in the game, and part of the other thing we consider when we're designing characters is how they're going to move and how they're going to get around. And we really like this linked up thinking in animation design and character concept work. So when we're designing this character, they're able to, the troll sisters are able to roll themselves up into boulders, and they're able to roll around the world and the scenes. And so we really like the fact that not only can we try and make the characters very appealing from a visual point of view in terms of their character design, the shapes and the colours, but we can also make them appealing from an animation design point of view, and we can design those two things at the same time, consider them at the same time. Again, it's that linked up thinking, I guess. So the other thing that's really important in animation is, people have probably heard about squash and stretch. This idea when weight is taken, the shapes of things change. And there's a famous animation test they used to do at Disney with, I think it was animating a flour sack or something, but it was an inanimate object, and they had to give it character. A lot of that was using the squash and stretch. And with 3D art, a lot of the time, things can feel quite rigid. So your characters can feel like these almost like really solid boxes that are stuck together. They're really rigid and solid and don't have any pliability. And our game is quite stylized, and we really wanted to get away from that. So we wanted to make our characters feel squishy. That's broadly the title of the talk, and to really soften them off and make them feel less like these rigid boxes, and give them a bit more squish. I think that really adds to their appeal, and also it allows you to, when the characters are quite small on the screen, it allows you to help them pop and sell things more distance. So on a small level, one of the things we do, and you may be able to see on the example on the right with Hendrix stuff. So we actually we squish the foot when it takes the weight. So when the foot comes down, it's like it comes down, impacts the floor, and then when the leg takes the weight, the foot spreads and scales, and it's much more than it would happen in real life. But it makes the feet feel quite sticky and pliable, and it really does help sell the fact that these characters are connecting with the ground and that they are in the scene. And a lot of these things, in terms of the secondary motion and some of the squishiness, they are pretty subtle, but it's about the layering up of all these subtleties to give an overall sense of weight and believability and sophistication and squishiness. So yeah, that's something we really like to push, and we are. I mean, the game is stylized. We are taking liberties with that stuff. We do things like when the characters blink in the game, like we squish the whole head. Like we really we squish the whole head, and it's the kind of the more thing they would do in 2D draw animation. Because of our art style, we're able to take liberties with that stuff, and it really helps get away from the characters being rigid volumes. I think we've got an example. We can look at some of that stuff now. Yeah. Okay, so here you can see a little movie of Tuve, and this is her the basic setup of the different elements that we have to play with on her head. And we knew from the start that we're with Röki, we're trying to tell this it's an adventure game. It's about exploring a folklore wilderness, but it's also we're trying to tell this quite emotional story of this reforging of a broken family. So we knew that the selling emotion was going to be a big part of it. And emotion is one of those really interesting things that even when a character is really small at a screen, you can read someone's facial expression, and that's remarkable. So you can read someone. I think that comes from our minds are really hardwired to read facial expressions and recognize people at long distances, and no different when you're seeing a character small in the game. You can really tell at a very long distance whether a character is frowning, whether happy or sad, and also their posture has a lot to do with that as well. But yeah, just a quick look at this. So it just breaks down the various bits of stuff we use. There's an animation studio called Leica who made I always get the name right, Kubo and the something 2 strings, and Box Trolls and those type, and Coraline, and they're stop motion studio, but they basically swap the face shapes. They actually they physically swap in a different model when they want to change facial expressions. And so we took inspiration from that approach rather than going down a blend shape route where we're morphing between different shapes. We basically just popping the shapes on and off, and that allows the animation style looks kind of unusual, and it's I wouldn't say unique, but it's something a bit different about it. But because we're popping the mouth shapes, we can have them be completely different geometries. It allows us to be quite extreme with some of the shapes, which is quite nice and quite liberating. So we can make them really, really expressive. And one of the things we found, we were like, well, how will this binary pop of face shapes read? But actually, the rest of the face, like the eyes and the eyebrows and the nose and all the physics driven bits, they're not stepped. They're all smooth, and so they tend to soften out this popping we have in the face shapes. It's a little bit of sleight of hand, an illusion, but it works really well. And but yeah, here you can see, we do a lot. We scale the eyes. We're talking about the squash and stretch, and even the pupils and the irises. you get a really big emotional read from that stuff. If you're changing the shape of the iris and the pupils to make the character feel more shocked or sad, you can really basically, this is our first test to see how many emotional levers could we get, and because we wanted as much stuff at our disposal to try and get as much emotion out of the characters that we could. And so they've been quite cool, and people have been quite receptive to the characters. And so here you can see this is Tuve again, and this is her just running through some of her various talk animations that we have in the game. And we basically how it works in the game, we have a big emotion library, as it's an emote library. So we have lots and lots of dialogue in the game. We have, I think it's over 38,000 words, and a lot of that is Tuve. And we basically tag, so she's not just standing there and flapping her mouth, and it's quite neutral for all the lines. We basically can tag each of the dialogue lines with an emote, and we have over 40 emotions for Tuve. And not only will that have a kind of targeted like a VO sample, we have like a emote sound that happens, but we also then link that into the animation. So as you've got the line of dialogue, which obviously has an emotional charge to it anyway, but then we're layering on the audio emote sound, and then keying into some of the animation stuff. And we tried to get it that even at a small distance, Tuve's face is very readable, and you can tell the emotion that she's having. So it helps kind of reinforce that. And the art style really helps with that, because it's so contrasty. You can still read the characters. You can still read the characters when they're really small, which is handy. It's really, really good. So that's a brief overview of the kind of things that we're doing with some of the character design. Like I say, it's a really fun style to work with, and it's very quick for us to iterate on all these different things. So it's it's neat. It's something I really like working this way. It's really fun to work with, and if we find that something's not working, we can change it out, and we can iterate on stuff quite quickly. One of the things that's always good to do, I guess, in any discipline in games, is to try stuff out as soon as possible. So we'll get stuff in game, we'll see stuff in situ. Generally, one of the things, definitely a mistake I made kind of early in my career, is you'll spend time on something, looking at something in whatever 3D software you're using, and then you'll get it in game and realize you've spent loads of time on something that's tiny, and you're never really going to see that much. So we always tend to work on like broad brushstrokes and get something in and see how it is and how it's working in situ, and then if it's required, we'll go and lavish more attention on something. But working this way is great. We can play around with things, and it's one of the things that's quite cool because of this flat shaded art style. It allows us to really basically cheat massively with lots of things. So in terms of one of the things that's notoriously hard in character art is maintaining volume when characters raise their arms, because and also when when your characters bend their arms, it's difficult to maintain the volume in those joints, because you'll tend to get squishing in the skinning. And if you look at our stuff, not to blow our own trumpet, but the stuff we have is really solid, and that's because we're actually intersecting stuff. And so like we have like the arm, so let's have a look. So if you imagine, we've almost got like an arm, and it's a separate shape, and then we have the forearm shape, which almost like intersects it, and they're almost like two sphere ends that sit perfectly aligned. So because it's flat shaded, you can't see any of the seams. It's just like a really super solid elbow joint. And the same with its shoulders, which are excuse me, even more notoriously hard. So that's really nice that we can do that stuff, and we can get really solid, like quality looking skinning with actually very little work, which is very cheeky. And but it's something that's really handy for us to be able to do. And the same with Tuve's like her head and her neck. Here you can see as she's running, her her head is actually sliding up and down her neck. So we're able to give this sense of like when she's hitting the ground, almost like a car suspension. Her head is reacting to that, and that's again, obviously that doesn't happen in real life. Your head doesn't slide up and down your neck. Your neck can compress, but you probably need like quite sophisticated setup. So our setup is relatively simple, but we are taking big liberties with it to be able to get as much squish and pliability out of our characters as we can. And again, if you go back to look at the facial setup, they're going, obviously people's eyes when they open, when they're scared or shocked, their eyes don't near the eyelids. Their eyes will open wider to get as much light in as possible. Whereas actually we're pushing it further. We're emphasizing it more. We're actually scaling the whole kind of eye unit that we have. And again, with the flat shaded art style, her eyes, it looks kind of scary. If you her eyes are basically two kind of these like spherical units that are nested, but they're just like sunken into her eye sockets. They're not really connected in any way. Like we have the shape to house them, but they're just kind of like plonked in there. So we can take quite a lot of liberties in that, and it doesn't really upset the rest of her face. So it's a really fun way of working. It's kind of it's kind of neat. So guessing the other thing that we do quite a lot. So in the trailer that we saw, you'll have seen there was the wolf, the big Jotun at the top of this guardian creature at the top of the mountain, and you've also seen Röki himself, who's at the end of the trailer, and they're created almost like, well, we call it kind of shadow puppets. So because we're working in this flat shaded art style, and because we have very staged cameras, because we want to take control of the cameras, so we could use cinematography as a storytelling device. So we have control of the cameras, but it also means that we can construct our worlds and our character and some of our big characters to the environments. And so that's quite interesting. So I'll bring up an example of one of those characters now, which we showed off recently on social media. And if you want, if this kind of thing is interesting to you, our Twitter account is @polytreehouse. So we'll usually share like concept art and animation tests and new scenes and stuff that we're working on as we're going. So that's a good place to keep up to date with what we're up to. Okay, so here you can see again, it's another Jotun creature which wasn't in the trailer, but this is a raven, and hopefully it gives the impression of being being quite sophisticated, and this 3D object. Like when the raven screeches, the head, the whole thing feels like it's coming closer to you in depth. Whereas actually this is entirely faked. So this is basically just a series of it is all 3D geometry, but essentially is 2D plane-like meshes that have been cut out and constructed to make to give this impression of a big bird. So all the individual feathers, they're just flat, cut out, essentially two-dimensional meshes. But because excuse me, but because of the flat shading style, they all kind of nestle together to give this impression of a wing, and how it compresses and expands. So there's a little bit of setup stuff in there, but essentially it is really, really simple. And one of the other tricks that we do quite a lot, which you can see here to help sell a sense of scale, we do a lot with all the fur stuff, where we'll basically have a very simple animation curve of like an undulating feather, and we'll start off, and that'll be the same on all the feathers, all the fur elements that we have, and then we'll just offset it. So we'll offset it across the entire creature, and that gives the effect you can see here of things rustling in the wind, and that adds a huge amount of sophistication. Also, really helps to sell the sense of scale when something's really big. But yeah, on this character, there's nothing that's actually like traditional 3D, I guess. I mean, it's all 3D geometry, but it's just flat meshes. But then we push in the animations, we'll push the depth quite a lot to really, to give the impression, trick the eye, and give the impression that something is 3D. And I'm guessing one of the reasons that we do that is that we really want to make us. Well, we have made this quite a big game. Röki is about, it's at the quickest it'll be a 12-hour playthrough. It's like 12 to 15 hours for a single playthrough of the game, and probably longer if you are a completionist and want to get all the different background loot objects and wilderness scout badges that you can earn in the game by doing various things. And obviously some of those are harder to get than others. So we've got this big story and lots of different locations and lots of different folklore creatures, but we do have a tiny team. Like, it's not a big team, and so we don't want to sacrifice the vision and the scale of the world. And so we work a lot using these methods to allow us to create huge giant creatures that would, if we tried to do them all in 3D and make them photoreal, would take us years and years and years. Whereas something like this, because I'm quite used to working in this style now. This Raven, we could create in a couple of days, and that's like from concept stuff to creating characters, animation, and then getting into Unity, which is the game engine we're using, and setting them up. The whole process is very quick, and it's quite convincing. I was chatting to someone the other day, and they were asking for another developer, and they were asking for a look behind the scenes at some of our. They were interested in seeing how we were doing certain things, and I showed them the wolf and how that's made, and they were surprised that it wasn't fully 3D. So you have to be quite. So yeah, that's really good. Basically, we're trying to give that impression of a really big, grand world, allow us to, using creative restrictions and imaginative ways of working to create these creatures and give this big adventure, but with a smaller team. And you can see that in the other characters as well. That basically this character, we were talking about really exploiting the art style and the flat shaded nature. Essentially is kind of like a series of like cubes that have been made to look more like boulders or spheres. Actually, the characters are relatively simple, and these things are just basically intersected with each other to create this vision of the character, and allow us to not spend loads of time on animation setup and just make the characters, animate the characters, get them in game, and then on to the next one. It's a really quick, freeing way of working, which has been really it's been really fun. It's really fun to build up this the cast of characters in this way. Cool. So yeah, if you do have any questions, drop them in the chat now. I can't see any right now, but the what I will say is I'll just give a bit of a wrap up. The demo is going to be on the Röki Steam page for as long as the LudoNarraCon festival is running. So give it a go. Hopefully you'll like it. The game is coming on loads. In terms of when the game is going to be out, we're looking forward to announcing that soon. But we're almost at the end. Which is like the last bits of development. The script's been locked. Everything's been localized. So now we're just we're finishing up in the game. So the game's going to be launching for Nintendo Switch and for Steam, which we're really excited about, and the reception's been really really cool. So brilliant. I'm going to call it a day there. But if you do have any other questions, feel free to ping them into the chat or hit us up on Twitter at Treehouse. Yeah. Okay, cool. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching.